recorded, so we're going to proceed for those that will be watching it after the fact. My name is Adam Blackmore. I'm the Director of Parks and Open Space for the city. And with us tonight, also representing staff, is Amber Brignall, our Open Space Superintendent. We have Bill from Lakers and Associates, one of our leading consultants on this project we're going to talk about tonight. We have Meg with the Ember Alliance, and then we also have Meg from Boulder County, the Senior Forest Health Planner, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the Community Wildfire Protection Plan that's being developed. So I'll let them go through everything that they're going to be doing this evening, but those of you online, 2 of you in the room, the 3 of you in the room, Mayor Pro Tem Deb Craigie, Chief John Wilson, all the esteemed representatives. Thank you guys for being here. We'll turn it over to Meg Halford first, and then we'll go over to Bill Blinker to go through the status of the current wildfire risks.
Okay, thank you for all coming. I'm Meg Halford. I'm with Boulder County. I'm with the Community Planning and Permitting Department on their wildfire team. I am the lead project coordinator for our county CWPP. We are also partnering on the community engagement portion of the CWPP with the City of Boulder and Mountain View Fire Protection District. We're all updating our CWPPs at the same time. So we got together and discussed, hey, instead of doing, like 12 different community engagement meetings and engagement you to death, we are partnering on several of the community engagement events that we have planned out. Okay, so we won't be at every one of theirs, but because Mountain View Fire Protection District it has a wide swath of their district and the City of Boulder, we thought let's come together and do some of these community engagement meetings together, as well as our public survey, which we hope that it goes live by June 1st, and there will be a QR code that you all can get into. We know that is not the perfect way for your voice to be heard. So the community engagement meetings will really be where it's for you, right? It's for you. We want to hear what your concerns are, and we want that to inform our CWPP. So I'm just going to give you a quick update because there were several questions last night when I was at that meeting last night. Do I just hit enter? Oh, enter. I can just talk to.
Oh, I'm sure you're supposed to be.
Ah, there we go.
Would you
hit?
the right?
Okay. So you don't need to read all this. I will read it for you, right? But like I said, we have come together as a collaborative effort with 2 other big entities who are doing their CWPPs. I am also on the executive core team for the Netherland Timberline and the Coal Creek Canyon one. So we're all talking to each other to try to make sure that we're collaborating and consistent across Boulder County on our CWPPs. Our smaller group meets every Wednesday. That's beyond our major executive core team. And we've developed a CWPP work plan approach. How are we going to engage all of you? That is so important to us. And we developed a draft community engagement zone map. And what I have here on the table over here, and I'll show you on the screen, is the Eastern Plains. We have 4 zones, and I'll go into that more. We had our first Boulder County CWPP core team meeting. I've been running CWPP meetings in my career for 18 years. This is the biggest turnout of representatives and stakeholders in Boulder County. We had everybody from every municipality, fire protection district at that meeting. That is an amazing sign of interest and folks who want to help all of you. So we had 45 plus attendees. And then for the county, we had applied for the Community Wildfire Defense Grant to fund and hire a consultant. We did not get awarded that. In fact, all of Colorado did, except for one, did not get awarded. However, I applied for the Colorado State Forest Service get this wrong, internal local government grant, and we were successful in getting awarded that. And then I just found out a couple days ago, we were awarded the Healthy Forest Vibrant Act funding to help fund to hire that consultant. So we're really excited that we were able to go outside of county funding and find funding to get a consultant on board so that we get this going. We have identified our Boulder County Executive Core team. And just so you understand what that means and all these teams mean, the Executive Core team is a smaller team that really makes up the decision-making and is signatories on the CWPP. So it's made up of a lot of experts and agencies that are going to be peer reviewing the CWPP as it is in development. Okay, and then I'm going to show you, so we've solidified that team, and we've also identified, because we don't have enough teams, 3 additional subcommittees to help us gather data and gather public input. So just going to move forward. So this is our diagram, just so you can see, right? This is our executive core team. Normally, on an executive core team, it's a little bit smaller, right? But we just keep adding because we're like, oh, we need that expert. And because Boulder County is kind of unique in its way of how many stakeholders and how many partners and groups and collaboratives that we work with. So we wanted to make sure we were well represented. And then the core team members, I never say no. That's actually gone up to over 50 people. I never say no if they're like, hey, I want to be on this core team member. Because what happens, this is a year-long plus process. People get a little burnt out, right? You're meeting, talking, reviewing, you're gathering, you're talking to a lot of people. So the more we can get and the more that we can task that middle tier to those subcommittees, better off we are. So we created a communications subcommittee, and that is specifically for CWPP communications. They're going to work with our executive core team, and they're going to work with our consultant when that consultant gets on board to communicate, make sure the communications are coming out to all of you throughout the entire county, right? Not in just one zone, but from every corner. So we're going to rely on our core members who are on that, these subcommittees, to really be pushing that out. We've got PIOs, we've got communication officers, marketing folks, and fire protection, and all kinds of folks that have those skills to keep you all informed. Okay, the Western Community Subcommittee is made up specifically, I wanted foresters, right? We wanted those foresters who have that expertise for our western side of the county to inform, one, to collect project and action level data, right? That goes into the CWPP, so we can get action on the ground, and also it's peer review for those portions, those recommendations. And also the Eastern Community Subcommittee. That is made, you'll see that I asked for like 4 to 5 people on each one. They have grown. Again, I'm never going to say no to people who want to help. And I really wanted folks who were from municipalities, local open space, and you'll be happy to hear I'm really trying to get a ditch company or 2 on this Eastern Community Subcommittee. I'm working on that. And I'm also working on them to hopefully come and present at our community engagement, right? Trying hard. Haven't secured that yet, but I'm working on that really hard to get them on there. This is our community executive core team. As you can see, it is made up of a wide range of expertise. We have fire protection districts that are representing the Western communities, And we have fire protection districts that are representing the eastern community. So we really wanted that localized expertise on there. Now, we just lost Lisa Ritchie, right? So we're gonna look for volunteers on that committee, right? So local Louisville who works with the communities and the people. That's what we're looking for to fill that vacant spot. We feel that's important on there. Emily Hogan is holding a big load on her shoulders right now. So we're looking for somebody else. No, just-
Does that have to be someone who works for the city of Louisville, or could it be someone potentially from a community organization that has members who reside or will be residing again when our houses get rebuilt in the city of Louisville?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and we get that question a lot. We really want the agency, the expertise who have that experience. Then this is our stakeholders. I didn't list all the names on there, and I didn't add all the fire protection districts on there because that will fill the box. But this is all the other folks who are coming to help us with that, right? And again, if someone calls me up and is like, hey, I want Fred on this committee, I'm going to take Fred on the committee if they have that expertise. Okay. Don't read this. I made it bigger for you. But these are our 3 subcommittees. Okay. Our communications, our Western and our Eastern communities. Here's our Boulder County CWP Communication Subcommittee. That's a mouthful, right? Again, we're looking for a Louisville rep who may have a lot of good experience in communications or PIO, or who has that knack. I know, I keep looking over at that table. She's like, I'm busy, quit looking at me. So we have a lot of representation, and we have a lot of great folks on this subcommittee. I mean, I've enlisted folks to make flyers. I've enlisted how are we going to reach the underserved, the seniors, the bilingual, those demographics. And I've enlisted these folks who are probably going to help us on our first community engagement meeting. If our contract doesn't get signed in time to hire the consultant to facilitate that meeting, I'll be facilitating that meeting with these fine folks. Okay, so we've got a lot of great folks who are going to help keep those communications going. Western, okay, again, these are folks who work out in the Western with the Western communities. So we're looking for that more of that forestry expertise who really has that eye and can help inform the CWPP. And then our Eastern communities, as you can see, we have a lot of different folks on here. This doesn't mean that we can't take any more. These subcommittees were meant to be small and manageable. But again, I'm not going to say no if someone's like, hey, I'll be there, because it's a long process, right? So we want to keep folks in there and engaged, and we don't want it to fall apart. And like I said, I'm working on ditch company representation. And as it was explained last night, it's not as easy as you all think. It's not like you call them going, hey, can you come help us? There's different, but I think if they come and they explain what their responsibility and how they operate and how maybe we can partner with them, that will help clear up some, maybe some myths or just not even knowing what they do. I mean, I don't even know exactly what they do as far as their responsibility. So we're really trying to get them into this fold. Any questions on that? Kind of going fast. And then don't read that, I'll just tell you, but this is what we're hoping. These are the deliverables that we're hoping from these subcommittees. Again, like I said, communications is really helping us and the consultant because it's a big county and there's a lot going on. to keep those, we can never have too many communications. And I know we've heard that we haven't had enough. So we are gonna communicate y'all a lot. So Western communities and the Eastern, we are looking for that specialty in each of those subcommittees to help collect project and action item level. And what does that mean? Maybe we go to, I keep looking at you guys because you're right there. Maybe we go to the town of Louisville and we say, hey, what's your 5 top priorities for wildfire protection, right? And they may say, hey, we've identified 25 cisterns we want, or hey, we want to do this or that. That's the data we want to collect to make sure we get into that CWPP, right? So that we can apply for some grants. Now we know that wildfire mitigation grants are there, of course, because this is the history of it. We have lots for the forest, the Western forest. That's where fires have been, will be, and will continue to be. Hopefully that shifts as the demand is more, that we get more of urban types. There are grants, the CWDG grant, FEMA, we love FEMA, and then the Ames grant. There are some grants coming up, and then hopefully, this is another thing we're working on, is some matching funds from the 1A county grant program that I'm developing right now to help offset those 50%, usually 50% matches. So we're looking to collect that data. We're not just collecting forestry projects, we're collecting urban projects. That could be outreach and education. That could be, hey, maybe local open space is partnering with a ditch company to do a mitigation project, right? So we're going to try to think outside of the box. We are not proficient at this yet as fire personnel. I'm a forester, right? I used to be a wildland firefighter. The forest is easy now, right? This is a huge challenge, and we have to learn along the way. So this is why this CWPP process is so important, because we're going to learn what your concerns and needs are, what the municipalities' concerns, needs are, and what they need, what their needs are. Maybe it's capacity building to have wildfire coordinators or outreach and education coordinators. That's what this team will help identify, right? There'll also be peer review on the CWPP for, hey, what we're recommending, is that right? Right. So we're hoping that we stack all this expertise onto this, that we really come out with an amazing planning document that doesn't sit there, but we get going on it. And that is my charge on this, is that it is a live working document. So I'm just gonna, last year we have our community engagement open house events. We've planned the first one. We kind of planned it quickly, and it's not our normal process. Normally we plan the dates, and we have a month or several weeks to get the marketing out on it. We decided, because Mountain View Fire Protection District's CWPP has to be done quicker than everybody that we're partnering with. So we decided, let's get the first one out. We may even come back to that zone, Louisville, Marshall, Superior, and El Dorado Springs, if we decide we need to do it again. Can't promise that, because we have 8 that we're doing, right? Big ones. So for just the plains, right, we have 4 planning. It's on that map. We have 4 zones. We're doing the first one, your zone D. And again, if we don't get the consultants under contract, the county will be facilitating that. It will be very heavily, you will be engaged. I guarantee you that. Okay. The dates have not been set for the other zones, because we're all slowly getting the consultant. We're using the same consultant under contract, right? Next time. And we're gonna set up open houses, right? So we'll have 2 hours that you can come and go. We thought that was best for kids and families who have children and who are going on vacation, right? We're gonna be doing a lot during the summer, so we wanted open house. Because you're in zone D, doesn't mean you can't go to zone C or A or B. We're gonna still be collecting the same, you can say, well, I'm way over here, that's okay. We'll have that map, and if you don't get that opportunity, you're gonna have opportunities all summer long, okay? And we really want your public input and concerns. That's gonna help inform our CWPP. This is our map. We've got 4 in the west. We got 4 in the east, right? And that's where we're gonna start working. This is in the old days when we go, we'd set up an open house at a fire station, and maybe we'd get like 10 people, right? We are pushing really, we know zone D is gonna be really attended, right? But we're really gonna put the marketing out there for these other zones. We want people to come, so we're gonna really work hard on that. And then just the Eastern Plains, right? Zone D is the purple down there, and from Longmont, and how we based that one was heavily on the fire protection districts, and what municipalities incorporated and unincorporated. And that is all I have for you. So are there any questions? I know that was fast. I was, Emily had called me and said, hey, give me an update and I'll inform the people. I said, hey, why don't I come and take that load off of you? So if you have any questions, please feel free. Anything? Yeah. Okay, thanks for coming.
Let's see. Unpaused. Okay, it's still. Okay. It's because we have a new window open, do you think?
I'm not sure. So, hey, folks on Zoom, do we have folks on Zoom? We are getting an error message that the screen sharing is not working. Will somebody raise your hand if you can see the slide? We're good? Okay.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna assume that you all can see the slide. Raise your hand if something else happens. Thanks, Larry, for confirming.
Thank you. All right. Oh, thanks, Meg, for that update on the CWPP.
Fast and furious. Promoting, recruiting.
All right, so I'm Bill Safransky. I work at Linker here in Boulder, and we're working with the City of Louisville along with our colleagues at the Ember Alliance to do this wildfire risk assessment. So we'll go ahead and just get into this here. If I can advance. There we go. All right, so we'll just quickly discuss what we're gonna, the purpose of this project. Then we'll talk about our wildfire risk approach. And then I'll pass it over to Meg, who's gonna talk about mitigation. And then we're gonna go into a breakout session and talk about mitigation a little bit more in depth. All right, so the purpose of our project, we are hired by the city of Louisville to conduct this wildfire hazard and risk assessment. So we could identify these hazards and come up with mitigation opportunities and recommendations for Louisville's public lands. So that's what we're here talking about today. We also want to be able to communicate these results with the public and get feedback and identify future funding opportunities. So some specific outcomes, again, identifying those wildfire hazards and risks to and from public lands, identifying and providing mitigation recommendations for those public lands. And these are mitigation actions that the city can implement for open space.
Maybe just double check and see where it's.
Okay, oh yeah.
Phrase it again, but must be said that it's still raised.
Yeah, where's the chat?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's
My
fine.
thumb's gonna go up again.
Wanted to see if Larry would, you know, make a new.
Allowed to talk.
I'll log in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Larry, we can hear you.
The slides I'm seeing on mine are the county presentation. I'm not seeing your slides.
Okay, yep, I had wondered about that.
And and the chat is disabled on I'm watching on the phone at the rec center because I showed up at the wrong place.
Oh, no. All right.
You read my slides. I updated it. At least you understand that. Well, all the other ones have been at the rec center, so. Yeah. Oh, really good. Oh, okay.
Let's see. There we go.
So I said, oh, I think.
All right, how about now, Larry?
I've got your slides. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for that feedback. Okay. Just wondering about that. Okay, so yes, back to our project outcomes. So focusing on mitigation actions that the city can apply, using what we've put together, both each immediately, each season, and in the long term for many years. We'll also be putting all of this content together in a final report and a complementary online story map. So we'll be having that available online for the public, and then additional wildfire resources that may be of interest. So we also want to note just, a few details on, this project. As I mentioned, this is a risk assessment for public lands, not a private property analysis. So we are focused on public lands in these adjacent areas. We do touch on some private property in the sense of buildings throughout Louisville, as you'll see in the presentation. But again, that focuses on public lands and mitigation recommendations for these public lands that we'll talk about more with Meg in a little bit. And then finally, that, of course, we can apply these mitigation activities to reduce the likelihood of these fire events. But, for these large devastating fires like the Marshall Fire, these mitigation efforts may not be as effective. All right. So if any of you have been to our meetings before, I've shown this figure. This is really how we talk about wildfire risk. So we've got two components: the wildfire hazard, which comes from our wildfire behavior model, which is actually the state's wildfire behavior model. And then we've also got our vulnerability element, which is what a lot of our work focused on, is identifying these public lands and assets, which I'll talk about both of these components here. So starting on the vulnerability side, what we kind of did as a part of this project was really a data gathering exercise where we collected GIS data from the city, refined that data so that we could identify those lands of interest and building grounds of interest in these adjacent areas. And then for the susceptibility part of the wildfire, we also want to determine kind of an importance rankings of these areas because we have a lot of disparate areas that we have to include into one risk assessment. So we develop these relative rankings, and we also use response functions as a way to relate damage to these different areas using wildfire flame length, wildfire intensity. So those are kind of all the components that go into the vulnerability side of things. And I'll be using this term highly valued resources and assets a lot, which just generally talks about these lands and assets of interest that are a part of this risk assessment. And these are mostly city, public lands and assets that we're interested in. So here's a kind of a short list of these different HVRAs. Again, these are the highly valued resources and assets, landscapes affected by fire, the things we care about. So our category 1 are these public lands, and the subcategories are the open space areas, city parks, the golf course, and then various other kind of undesignated parcels. So that's our category 1 for public lands. Category 2 is our building facility grounds. This includes buildings like the recreation and senior center, the police station, the city services building, and then many of the buildings that are downtown. And then the water facilities we broke out as its own group, as these are kind of critical facilities that are important for city services, obviously. So these are the water treatment plants, the wastewater facility, Harbor Lake, to name a few. So categories 1 through 3 are our city assets, city HVRAs, lands. The 4th and 5th categories are non-city lands and assets. So 4 is, we're using the term WUI here, the wildland urban interface, and really what we're talking about are buildings in the city proper. So that's where that's our category 4. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then category 5 is other public lands. So adjacent public lands that are not City of Louisville or maybe co-owned by Louisville and other agencies, and then private lands that kind of serve as open space as well. All right, so here's a map of these city HVRAs. So this is categories 1 through 3, like we talked about. This is the open space areas shown in kind of the orange, yellow. The city parks are shown in the green. We've got the water facilities shown in the blue colors. And then some of the city buildings shown in red. So those are our different facilities. And then we do have the golf course in its own color here. So these are all of those kind of city areas of interest for this project. Next, I'll hop to category 5, which are these or adjacent non-Louisville lands. So other public lands, other private lands. So the private lands we're showing here in the purple pink category, where we've got some larger parcels here. And then the other public lands are shown in these more reddish colors. So this could be Boulder County, City of Boulder Open Space Mountain Parks, Lafayette, Superior. So those are all kind of categorized together. And also on this map, we're showing the City of Louisville boundary in the solid black line. And then we've got our project area where we extended, we looked to a little bit outside of the city boundary for our analysis as well. And that's shown in that dashed black line. Okay, and then finally doubling back to the wildland urban interface. So I put a couple definitions here of really what this means. So it says Technosilva. This is from the state's wildfire modeling work a couple of years back. The land where humans and their structures meet or intermix with wildland fuels, or the zone of transition between unoccupied and human development. So really we can think about kind of the intersection of where people live and these open space areas. And so in this map here, We're showing those areas in white. And that's kind of calculated using some of the fuels data from the state's wildfire modeling combined with our building footprint data that we used, which is a Microsoft building data set.
So only the part in white is what you're considering the warming area?
That's right, because which I know seems a little counterintuitive, but it's only because in the urban core of the city, so kind of this, a lot of these central areas in the wildfire behavior model, those are categorized as kind of non-burnable fuels because they don't have they're not forested areas or shrubs or grasslands. And obviously we do know that embers can move, fire can move from house to house, but traditionally in these behavior models, they're non-urban models. And so there's approaches that are implemented to kind of encroach those fire into urban areas, and that is done in the state's model. But for like urban cores, like the heart of Louisville, the heart of Boulder, the heart of Denver, those are kind of categorized in the fuels model as non-burnable areas. And so where you see these white areas, this is likely open space areas that have fuels. So they're kind of considered in that domain. All right, and then this map just kind of shows the overlay. This is really hard to see, so I'll probably skip over it, but the overlay of non-city owned land in the red and the purple, and then city-owned land is crosshatched, like this is Davidson Mesa up here, of course. And then this is the golf course here. So some of those areas are owned by the city, some are not owned by the city. Okay, so now we're going to transition from the vulnerability side to the wildfire behavior model. Again, this is the state's model that they're actually right now updating. This is the public URL where you can take a look at that model. You can see these results online. This is a kind of a simple schematic of that behavior model, inputs and outputs. We're really focused on the burn probability and flame length outputs, which we use in our risk assessment. So this map shows burn probability. These are using the categories from the state's model, where we've kind of got lower burn probabilities, lower likelihoods of an annual fire event, a likelihood of a fire will occur. So those lower probabilities are in green. Again, this is kind of shown in the center of the city. And then medium burn probabilities shown kind of in the yellow in the west and east side of the city. And then higher burn probabilities, higher likelihood of a wildfire event shown in these darker orange and red colors. And that is kind of shown in the southern area. Yes.
Is that probability based on current information in like weather conditions and I'm just looking at the Davidson Mesa right now. It's
Right.
colored very orange, and that's where it came through.
Right.
So-
Yes, of course. And so I will note that this is calculated through a probabilistic modeling framework where they run thousands of simulations, I think even millions of simulations. They ignite grid cells across the entire state and then let the fires kind of burn in the model. And where fires burn longer and more often, basically those are calculated with a higher burn probability. And so obviously with the Marshall fire, we know it came through Davidson Mesa. So we're all, aware of that area and concerned about that area. But from thinking of this model as a state model, a lot of the highest burn probabilities in the state are going to involve those higher fuels like forested areas. So it's kind of relative to one another within the state.
So are they considering the change in climate change and how things are, weather and the dryness of the grasses and things that's going to change?
That's a great question. They are not considering like climate change in the sense of future. It's not a projection of future weather in like 2050 or 2070. But in the update that the state is working on, they're updating that weather data so it includes 2020, 2021, 2022 weather data. So it will capture basically the record will include more years of more frequent arid, dry periods, which will kind of reflect our drying trend that we're seeing. So in any case, when they run this model, it is kind of a snapshot of at that time. All right, so this map shows average flame lengths across the city. These are all pretty similar because we have pretty similar fuels in the sense of how it relates to flame length, similar heights, grasses. So these are kind of give us pretty average results across the city. And then I'll skip to hazard finally, or sorry, wildfire risk, where we put each of these components together, our burn probability, our flame length probability, and then those public lands and asset susceptibility, all the vulnerabilities I talked about, all of these come together into our calculations for wildfire risk. So what we can see here now is that areas in the south where we have those higher burn probability, where we saw those higher burn probabilities are also showing a higher risk. And in this area, we have the South Water Treatment Plant in that area. We show Davidson Mesa with kind of a moderate low risk. And then a lot of the center parts of the city kind of have the lowest risk as they're part of that center city core. So now I'll overlay some of these public lands HVRAs that we talked about. We've got the Harper Lake and North Harper Lake here, North Treatment Plant up here, Davidson Mesa here, and then some of our the golf course here. So that's kind of a quick overlay there. And we do have some of these maps printed out that we can kind of come back to after our mitigation discussion. I'm going to skip this section in the interest of time and send it over to Meg to talk about mitigation. As I said, we do have maps printed out so we can look, and I'm happy to answer any more questions that folks have. But I'm going to pass it over to Meg first, and we can talk about mitigation.
Let's see, Larry, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I did. I was going to ask, are there any plans to overlay the actual fire event over the predictive maps?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's definitely something that we can take into consideration. We're still working on final maps and results. So I think absolutely a map of the fire would be good, and having it overlaid, I think might make sense.
I just mention it because I think the state is underestimating the potential for fire events in other parts of the state, similar to what we experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. The uniqueness of the Marshall Fire, or in terms of the devastation and the winds, make it, obviously that's why we're here, is because of the Marshall Fire. So, yeah, Meg.
So on those maps, just so folks understand, was that at just a normal weather pattern, 20-mile-per-hour winds? How was that?
Yeah, so that actually uses the averaging or the weighting, I should say, of weather percentiles from the state's modeling framework. So it does weight basically the likelihood of a fire event is more frequent or more likely to happen during those higher winds, drier conditions. So those weather events are given a higher weighting across all of the average weather data.
So I think people see that map, they're like, oh, why are we all red, and understanding that running different weather percentiles might help them understand.
Yeah.
With my question on the weather issues was, if the considered that these temperatures of the winds are going to be going up and becoming more extreme every year because of climate change. And that's going to impact what the risk is for fires everywhere.
Right, yeah, it's hard to, I would say the short answer is no, the updated model reflects the updated snapshot of current conditions, which is different from 5-10 years ago, but it doesn't reflect future conditions.
Yeah, I think Larry raises a good point to overlay the maps, because where you were showing low and moderate is exactly where the fire went.
Yep, on the west side of the city where we all live. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 I would just like to add, I'm a
Sorry, Larry,
Colorado native.
Larry, there is somebody in the back, and then I'll go to you, okay?
Okay,
What would this report be used for? Because if that's what they're making decisions based on, maybe we can get funding for the driving conditions that we know of.
Yeah, so the report will be used, it'll be presenting these results as well as some of the results that Meg will be talking about. And so it'll be used by the city to help inform and guide their mitigation actions. So where, what treatments make the most sense and where to basically use limited, mitigation dollars that the city has, where to kind of best put those, that makes sense for the risk assessment and based on the work that Meg's team did.
Maybe have more way funding.
If there's more funding,
1A.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe there will be 1A.
okay.
Yeah, it's not good. But the state is updating their fire model that they're running, and they have improved or included grasslands and modeling in that where it hasn't been that prominent before. So just understand it, and people hate to see red and orange, but they're like, why am I not in red and orange if we just had a fire blow through here, right? And again, keep in mind the extreme weather event that happened in Drive, so,
Yeah, and I also just note that these values are relative to one another within the city. So the highest risk was found in that southern corner, which also, saw fire. And just based on the way the modeling worked, it's lower for Davidson Mesa, but it's also still in terms for the city, it's kind of the next, the area with like the next most risk, wildfire risk. And so if we think about it in relative terms, I think that's important. All right, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Larry, did you have something?
I do. I'm a Colorado native. I'm in my 70s. 60+ mile-an-hour winds are common from Fort Collins to Pueblo on the eastern slope. What's changed is lands that used to be under agriculture, either grazed down or farmed, are now letting just unrestricted growth in the vegetation. And I think the models somehow need to reflect that.
The fire behavior fuel model used for the lands is definitely not short grazed grass, except in areas that are heavily grazed. It's more of the, if you know fire behavior modeling like GS2 or GR2 or 3, which is taller grass with higher flame lengths and rates of spread. But I think big picture, what you're talking about is a really good point, and that gets into some of the mitigation options that we're going to talk about, with the fact that a lot of the grasslands around here are highly diverged from historic conditions and from conditions when grazing was more prevalent. So thank you for that. It was a great lead into the next section. My name is Meg Matonis. I'm a wildfire analyst for the Ember Alliance. I have my PhD in forest ecology And I've been an on-call firefighter with Larimer County Sheriff's Office for 8 years and been on a lot of prescribed burns and initial attacks, both in the forests and the grasslands. And for the part of the project that we're assisting with, we are helping provide strategic recommendations for how to mitigate wildfire risk. I really like the city of Superior. They're calling it to increase wildfire resiliency. I think that's probably a better framework than mitigation. And that really is the goal for when there are fires in the future, for us to be able to bounce back from them quicker with less impacts. So while I was doing this assessment with my coworker, Kristen, and we were driving around, it was very eerie to hear hammers everywhere, and upsetting and shocking. And I'm really sorry for all of you who went through that event. As a firefighter, it was shocking to me to see some of the areas that had burned, and I just never would have predicted that fire would have burned trees in the middle of medians. So that I'm glad I had the opportunity to drive around and just get a sense of the magnitude, and it really informed a lot of the recommendations that we're making, in the sense that there's a lot of work that can be done, but the risk is always going to be high. It was also kind of funny. One day I was driving around and feeling really heavy about, just what possibly could be done to prevent another experience like this. And I went to Anne Brandt Park, and there was like a clown convention going on that day, which made me laugh. So it's like, so there's still like joy and opportunity and beauty in this community. So I think that's kind of where some of this resilience piece comes in. So just to start framing this conversation about mitigation, I wanted to talk about wildfire behavior. So the facilitated learning analysis, that's really great and online, and I'm sure a lot of you have already seen that, talks a lot about weather and fuel, topography a little bit. It's not quite as complex topography here as you have in more mountainous areas. But when we're talking about mitigation actions, what we're directly talking about is doing something to the fuel. And fuel is a very complicated factor of the fire behavior triangle to explain, because it's the type of the fuel. Is it a home? Is it a grass? What kind of grass is it? Is shrubs, trees, the amount of fuel, and then also how it's arranged. So is there an ability of fire to move from grasses in the understory up into trees? Is there the ability of fire to travel rapidly across a grassland with no interruption, and then travel along fuel pathways such as fences or ditches, riparian areas? And then obviously there's an interplay between the sides of the fire triangle, because weather affects fuel moisture, and grass of all fuels reacts the most strongly to changes in weather from hour to hour. I was on it was a wildfire. This one was a wildfire in North Dakota, and we were lighting off the line. It was so hot, I had to put like a glove up to my face, and then a front moved in, and within an hour, the fire extinguished itself. So fuel moisture, when you're in a grassland, matters a lot. And that was one of the things about the facilitated learning experience. Like there is a lot of continuous grass here, but there is also exceptionally dry, windy conditions. The weather side of the triangle, the topography side of the triangle, we can't really do anything about. The weather side indirectly through, approaches to address climate change. That's kind of the one way that we can interact with weather in terms of wildfire behavior. Topography, unless you're terraforming, there's not much that can be done about the topography side. So we're really focused on what can we do about the fuel to change wildfire behavior. And fuel treatments is the big encompassing term for manipulating, burning, removing fuels to change any of these aspects. The type of fuel, the amount, the arrangement, and then by changing the type, you can sometimes change the moisture content of that fuel. For clarification, I wanted to explain two key types of fuel treatments. So there is a fire break, and that's what we dig on the ground as firefighters, where you are using tools, you're scraping away all material, not just the grass, you're scraping away all of the organic matter, the decaying leaves, and you're going all the way down to bare soil. That is a fire break. A fuel break is an area where there still are fuels, but they've been reduced. So mowing along a fence line is a fuel break. It is not a fire break. And one thing to keep in mind, fuel treatments absolutely work. There's a lot of research showing that modifying fuels can change fire behavior. It can change rates of spread. It can create opportunities to engage in fire suppression. But they also have a point at which they fail, and they don't address ember production from other places. So a fuel treatment can reduce ember production from the area you treated. It can reduce the susceptibility of the fuels to receiving an ember, but it cannot stop an ember from somewhere else blowing into that area. And the Marshall Fire, one of the things that was so appalling, shocking, unbelievable about that fire was embers blowing across a 6-lane highway. That would typically, firefighters would be, that's a control line. We're stationing people on this side. We don't need to worry. The interstate is the highway is going to stop it. So that's just, it's important to keep in mind. We can do a lot to reduce radiant heat, rates of spread. Addressing ember cast is where like the home hardening piece comes in. There's also a lot of factors that influence the effectiveness of treatments. So not all treatments will work as effectively in different places at the same time. So a big message of the rest of my presentation is about trade-offs that we need to think about. And we also need to think about how big of a hammer are we willing to use? Because sometimes you need a bigger hammer if you're trying to prevent something like a Marshall Fire. If you're trying to prevent something like a fire that might happen under still extreme, but not as abnormal conditions, then the treatment approach that you take is a little bit differently. The approach you take is a little bit different. So these are just some pictures from prescribed burns showing, you know, here, there's still, this isn't a fuel, it's not a fire break, it's a fuel break because there still is some dead material here, but on the conditions when they did the burn, that was enough to stop the fire from crossing their containment lines. There's probably a factor about wind direction under that too. A big important factor too is one of the purposes of fuel treatments is to create opportunities for firefighters to engage in suppression, especially in forests. A lot of fuel treatments are most effective or sometimes even only effective if firefighters are also there, but firefighters wouldn't be there if a treatment had been done because it wouldn't be safe for them. So some of the approaches that the city of Louisville can take are creating areas where firefighters can then create a fuel break during a fire or have easier access. This is just hitting home the importance of the unfortunate impact that embers have on home loss being a primary driver. So a lot of the work that City of Louisville can do can help with the radiant heat, flames impinging on homes, but it cannot directly address the issue of embers blowing away from property that they don't manage or from home to home. So just keep in mind, there's a point at which things fail. Just like when somebody builds a bridge, there's a point at which that bridge will fail under, you know, X hurricane force winds. So we conducted an on-the-ground assessment in 12 different properties. There actually was a little bonus property because I was right by Keith Hellert Park, so I made observations about that one too, by North Open Space. So these are 12 properties that are representative of conditions in a lot of other parks. So recommendations from what we observed in these areas can be applied to other properties owned by the city. Some of the key findings is there is extreme variation in your open spaces and parks in terms of the fuels that are there and the exposure of values at risk. A lot of times you see a grassland and you just think it's grass, but there's huge differences between the types of grass, the amount of grass, and the arrangement of grass. So this is from the city when they did an assessment of vegetation in Davidson Mesa. There are, I think, 13 different vegetation types across this entire one property. So when we're talking about fuel treatments, it's important to realize like not every area will be treated the same because current conditions aren't all the same. These are pictures that I took on the same day in Davidson Mesa, showing areas that have taller grass where you could see really rapid rates of spread with high flame lengths being carried by the image on the lower left. The other three, the fuel is not continuous. You could have more interrupted fire behavior. And a lot of that is from prairie dogs.
I was just gonna say, prairie dogs are-
A lot of that is the prairie dogs, which I'm also showing here. So these are two open spaces, Donbaugh and Warrenburg, which are right next to each other. One of them has prairie dogs, the other doesn't. The one with prairie dogs is absolutely a fuel break already. Warrenburg itself has a lot of variation. There's some areas where there's great like native bunch grasses and other areas where it was a lot more continuous smooth brome, like a lot of areas. Like I mentioned before, grasses, dead grass changes very dramatically throughout the day in terms of its fuel moisture. They also change dramatically throughout the year. So these are pictures I found on Google Maps of like the same part of Davidson Mesa open space, just showing that throughout the year, year to year, there's huge variation in the amount of risk. So those are all factors to think about. It does add challenges to mitigation and requires that the approach that the city of Louisville takes from year to year varies based on conditions like weather conditions and how that's affecting grass. Another finding is, as a third party, I did not see any like gross mismanagement of open space, parks, or other facilities. I think everybody with the city would agree there's things they could do better, there's things they would love to do better, but there are a lot of challenges to managing grasslands. There's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of acreage, and there's a lot of degraded areas that will take a lot of work to push them towards conditions where you have native grasses and a lot more dirt. Grazing cows everywhere isn't going to be possible anymore. So the city of Louisville is already engaged in a lot of work to mitigate wildfire risk. As I was driving around, I took these three pictures of work that's being done in 3 different areas to address fuels in 3 different ways. One of them is a great project to help plant native shrubs, try to push things a little bit more towards the shortgrass prairie ecosystem that we used to have around here, cattle grazing that happens on Davidson Mesa. And then Adam was telling me that there's goat grazing currently going on right now. Then there's a lot of, I found a lot of stumps and trees that had been limbed. So there's a lot of active work being done. So I think hopefully you can find some solace in that. The city is taking this very seriously. That's why they hired us. And hopefully with feedback from you, we can come up with some additional solutions. You know, sometimes it's scary to like get public feedback, but I'm like really excited. I was hoping there'd be more people here because every public meeting in this area that I've either attended or I've listened to all the recordings, somebody has said something where I'm like, I never would have thought of that. Like there's just challenging situations require creative solutions. And I think people who aren't firefighters, people who aren't grassland managers, maybe aren't limited in the way that those of us who have been in this a while and like think, you know, do this things we've the same way we've always done them. So we definitely want to hear from those of you who are here if you have some creative solutions. So the trade-offs are a really important thing to consider. In an ideal world, we could have beautiful grasslands that increase the value of our home with low fire risk, with privacy so people aren't peeking into our backyard, with prairie dogs that are there, but they're not too close to your property. And unfortunately, that's natural resource management. I really can't think of much of anything that works like that, where there aren't trade-offs. So we'd like to hear from you. We're looking at some of the research too, but some of it is a social decision. Like, are you willing to accept a fire break, like no vegetation all the way down to bare soil on one side of your fence? Or is that a social trail now right along your fence line that you're not willing to accept? So unfortunately, we can't maximize all of the services that we want from the natural areas, from the parks, and minimize all the things that we don't want at the same time. So I'll go through some of the different approaches and some of the pros and cons. I won't go into them ad nauseum. There's a lot of research behind these and that will be in the report. But I just wanted to give some perspective on the suite of different mitigation options that are before the city and that we're working with them to look at the results of the work that Bill and his team did to figure out where some of these approaches make more sense. So shortgrass prairie restoration, that's my favorite approach. I think the shortgrass prairie ecosystems that we have used to be much more resilient to fire, much more resistant to really continuous fire behavior. They still burned and they still burn frequently and fire would still carry, but when grasses are shorter and they're less continuous, it's easier for firefighters to engage and suppress them. You get these patches of grass. It's great for increasing biodiversity, good for habitat of wildlife, beneficial insects. It is expensive though, and it takes a lot of work and it takes some management approaches that not everybody is a fan of. So a lot of research shows when you have smooth brome in particular that has invaded entire open spaces, you need to do some herbicide. Which is, we'll talk about that on the next slide, I think, or 2 slides. You also need a combination of herbicide, prescribed burning, grazing, native seeding. You need to continue this work over time. You don't just get a shortgrass prairie and then it's good to go. You have to manage it over time so that you can continue to fight back against the non-native plants. And in parks, particular, where you have a lot of people moving from park to park, people visiting from outside the area, seeds on their shoes, it's really hard to mitigate invasive species spread in urban areas. So herbicide can be used in combination with other integrated weed management strategies. Somebody at the meeting in Superior yesterday was mentioning that there's a new publication about integrated weed management that shows that you don't need to use herbicide. And if any of you know that, I would love to find, I couldn't find the publication online, but there definitely are some fungus, like there's the black fingers of death fungus that can address cheatgrass, but usually not on the scale or at the rapidity that you would need to rapidly address the issue that non-native grasses pose for fire behavior. So herbicide is one thing. If we want to get to shortgrass prairie ecosystem, we might need to accept some herbicide in some areas. And I know Boulder County Open Space, and I'm sure the city of Louisville are committed to using the lowest dose possible, only where you need it, under conditions where it doesn't pose as great of a health hazard. And I think that, you know, if people are willing to accept herbicide, you know, making sure that that's something you talk about with the city so that you're comfortable with when, where, and how. But getting rid of the smooth brome. So North Open Space is like all smooth brome. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful area that doesn't have a lot of native plants yet. They're kind of hidden in there. And that is like, of the areas that I visited, that's the one where I was like, if it's really dry and a match were to drop, I don't know why would a match drop out of someone's pocket? Okay, if somebody had a barbecue and fire, a lightning strike, there we go. Everyone is very responsible in the city. So it's a lightning strike. You could have very rapid, intense rates of spread. So doing something about the smooth brome in areas where there's also steep slopes and lots of homes, I think is really important.
Is that the area behind the water treatment plant?
Yes.
Just for context.
Yes. Yeah. Herbicide, obviously, it can have negative impacts on human health if not used properly, impacts on water quality if you don't follow best management practices in riparian areas. And then I'm super big on beneficial insects, and some herbicides have less impacts on insects than others, but it's just one of those like unavoidable trade-offs. I wish it wasn't like that, but it's. Prescribed burning is another very important natural process in grassland ecosystems, and it's a great way to rapidly reduce the amount of dead grass in an area and to create patches of bare soil. Fire can be used along with herbicide to manage some non-native species, but it depends on the season when you're burning. it's usually spring burns that are best before you get the seeds out of the smooth brome or cheatgrass. They are scary because it's fire, and it's scary in a wooey wildland urban interface area where your home is nearby. But the city of Longmont does a lot of burning, like within the city. It can be done under the right conditions, with the right resources, with the right qualifications. And research shows like the rate of escape is very low. And of the 1 to 3% of fires that do escape, very few of those have more have traumatic impacts. Some of them do, and that is, I think, where some of the fear comes from. Like it is a risk. It's one of those trade-offs, but prescribed burning can be done safely. It will produce smoke. It can take years to actually get a burn to happen because you need the right weather conditions, when you have the right resources available, when air quality permits you to do the burning, and when the fuel is receptive. So a lot of times you need a little bit of wind and you need a little bit of dry conditions and you need a little bit of heat to get the burn to actually do what you want it to. Oh, and then also there's sometimes if non-native species respond really well to burning, then you might need to do some post-burning weed control, either with herbicide or other approaches. Animal grazing currently being used by City of Louisville, being used by Boulder County Open Space. There used to be bison grazing the shortgrass prairie. So a lot of native grasses are very resilient to grazing, and grazing can decrease the buildup of dead grasses. It can reduce the height of grasses, which can reduce flame length. Goats can be great for decreasing the abundance of shrubs and other vegetation. Animal grazing is also important to the local economy. I know there's a lot of private leases for the Boulder County open space land. And there's some new approaches that maybe can make managing animals to prevent overgrazing a little bit more cost effective instead of requiring a bunch of fence construction. There's like GPS collars that can shock cows when they go where you don't want them to. So there's some new technological advances that can help with animal grazing to mitigate the hazards that tall grasses pose in terms of fire risk, and then also potentially address some non-native species. Although grazing, when done improperly, can also promote non-native species, and it can create some human livestock conflicts. People need to be willing to accept their favorite natural area being closed for a month so that grazing can happen. Or you need to accept that you're going to smell cow poo and hear cows mooing in your backyard while the cows are there. So that's one of those like trade-offs. We have to decide if we're willing to accept it. Prairie dogs, maintaining the colonies that are present, I think these are fantastic areas for reducing fire behavior. The prairie dogs did a bunch of work already to mitigate fire and create really effective fuel breaks, and they're native to here. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Yeah, it creates a lot of patches of bare mineral soil. They do, by removing the grasses, we already have native species, allow non-native species of forbs to really proliferate. And then they can cause damage to trails and property that people don't like. And then there's diseases in prairie dog colonies, and then human wildlife conflicts. But I think it's great that there are prairie dogs where there currently are. And we should give them a gold ribbon for doing their part. Another approach that people have been discussing a lot is the thought of doing mowing across open spaces. And yes, mowing would reduce the height of grass, which would reduce fire intensity. It could reduce rates of spread. Mowing can be useful for mitigating some non-native species. It's been done on Davidson Mesa to address Russian thistle before. In areas where you want recreation, mowing is obviously, you want to do that so you have nice lawns to play soccer on. There are problems with mowing though. It really isn't like the silver bullet to address fire risk in suburban areas. It would be potentially feasible to mow all open space, but you'd have to collect all of those clippings as well. Otherwise, you now are you're turning grass that was live into dead fuel that is dry and can burn and can blow. So that's some problems with the idea of mowing everywhere. It also is in conflict with the goal of open space management, which is multi-use habitat. It would turn things more into a lawn that wouldn't have all the other ecological values, ecosystem services. It can introduce and promote non-native species, degrade habitat. Some areas it's even unsafe to send people out there to do the mowing, and mowers can sometimes spark fires, although there's ways to mitigate that. Probably a better approach is more selective mowing. So mowing along fences and trails, which the city of Louisville already does, and they started doing that more regularly after the Marshall Fire. A mowed patch of grass is an effective fuel break. It's not a fire break, so fire can still travel through an area that is mowed. But flame lanes will be shorter. It would be much easier for firefighters to use, they're called flappers. It's like a truck rubber flapper that goes by their tire on a stick. It's like the most unsophisticated piece of technology, and you just smother little flames. You can't do that when you have huge tall grasses with tall flame lanes. You could do it along a fence line and a trail. The city of Louisville has an ordinance that residents can actually do this already behind their property. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. So one of our recommendations is like, make sure people know that they can do that. And if, the city's doing some of the mowing themselves, they're not just saying like residents need to do it themselves, but if residents like they want to mow every week, that is something that is possible. I don't know if there's rules about like weather conditions when you're mowing, because of currently no. So let's see. There's the issue of clippings, but if you're just doing mowing along fence lines and trails, you're not creating the quantity of dead clippings that you would if you were to mow an entire area. Yes.
Oh, I was just gonna say, well, one thing about this, my house just experience backed up to open space. And I didn't know about this. I lived there for 20 years. The city used to mow a fire break and then they stopped mowing it, and I found out that I could have mowed it. But my point is, and I think right now it's fine because there's no grass there because it all burned. But if it was in my pre-fire condition, there's no way my little
Right.
lawnmower is gonna mow grass that's 3 feet high behind my fence.
That's
Or
good.
my side fence. Which is not
Mhm.
okay. So, I mean, I am supportive of this approach as long as the city is at least gonna mow close enough or whatever that we as residents with our dinky lawnmower. And I don't have to rent a push, what do you call it, a ride along mower to get out there and actually do that. I guess.
That's
And once you do that, with your DD little lawnmower and maintain that, then it's obvious it's gonna be easier, right? But that's one of the things I think we're all trying to do is what can landowners do?
And I mean, and then 10 feet past that though is the rest of the open space, right?
Mhm.
And then a path, so. It has to be, it has to work together.
yes.
I like living on space, I'm just saying that,
No, that's I put that down. That's and the first pass is going to be hard in a lot of areas that
Yeah,
haven't burned out.
there's no way that my dinky little mower would have mowed the grass that
Yeah.
was literally this high next to my fence, so.
In case you couldn't hear online, the comment was that a lot of people who live by open space have really tall grass behind their homes, and it's the grass that is so tall and dense, you wouldn't be able to address it with a private lawnmower. You need some help to get started. Yes.
Is there a recommended length to cut the grass?
Oh, to cut the grass. So there's not great science on it. 4 to 6 inches is what the home ignition zone guide from the Colorado State Forest Service suggests. I think, the shorter, the lower the flame rates you'll have, but the shorter you go, the higher chance of a spark from your blade hitting a rock. So
Yeah.
4 to 6 inches. So usually when you're building a fire break, so going down to bare soil, you want your fire break to be 2 to 3 times the width of the height of the fuel right next to it. So if you're mowing a 10 feet area and you're mowing it to 4 inches, it's wider than it would technically need to be, but it's probably good to go on the side at 10 feet wide. So 4 to 6 inches is what I've seen. I think that's one area where we don't have a lot of great research where people mowed lawns and then burn them at different heights. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't give a better answer than that.
Yeah. No, that, but the rocks are a problem.
Yes,
And then if you start early in the season, you can get the grasses. cut
Yes.
Before they get too high, but then you gotta.
yes, it is maintenance. You know what? We could start employing a bunch of high schoolers to mow around the community to keep them busy all summer.
Yeah.
Yes,
So I saw something that said about roads and ditches, and ditches also run for our area quite a lot, and I was wondering if you could offer anything about that, because that's a challenge.
having the goats there.
No, just about ditch maintenance.
Oh, the ditch maintenance.
At all. I'm sure
Yes.
You saw ditches while you were going around.
Yes, yes, yes.
And they like wildly and crazy all try out fields. Wood goes out, it's not really mowable. What do people do? It's difficult.
Yes. The goats for addressing some of the woody material is probably I'd have to look at cost effective, because you could pay people to go out there and like cut the material and drag it away. So I don't know about the cost of that versus goats, but goats are great at managing shrubby, dead, overgrown areas. Be easier probably for goats to get back there than a person, but
But we used to do goats a lot in oak, right? But they're not gonna eat woody. They'll nibble leaves, they'll nibble grasses, but they're not gonna nibble woody limbs or anything. So as far as ditch management goes, maybe around that might be efficient, but again, and we talked about this last night. It's a short grasses grow fast. It's not like a pine tree that you cut and then 20 years later, that honest pine grows back. So as managers, we're trying to think, what's the best way? It is a fast growing season for grass, unless you get your prairie dogs out there to death and get it all together. So, it's a good question, but yeah.
I'll just add too that we are looking at, we do have a map, I didn't show up, but we do have a layer of the ditches around the city and like a layer of where the city is maintaining. And so we'll, as a part of our work, we'll, be providing recommendations around that kind of ditches. As a part of the general recommendation.
Another condition or consideration for the ditches is that the city is not allowed to maintain some of the ditches.
No.
That's for the ditch companies, and they don't want us. And so we have to do some kind of cooperative agreement or something, and that would be great to come up with some kind of suggestion about how we can interact with ditch companies.
Yeah, I'd say ditches are a great example of the complexity of the issue, as far as the ownership responsibility, as far as there is no one method that's going to work perfectly all the time. So we're looking at, you're seeing sort of an array of options, and I would look at it like a little smorgasbord. You're going to need to do multiple things. So it might be in a ditch. Maybe you need to work with a ditch company to get approval to remove the woody material, and then maybe later go to be effective at reducing the grass on the ditch line. But it's not as easy as a one solution for every situation. So it's really the combination that we need to look at. And it's not, again, in forest, right? You've got a tree, you have that opening for a long time, right? Depending on the species. In grasses, it has to be quicker management, and again, CWPP, I see great opportunity partnering, bringing those folks to the table and partnering the city, the municipalities, the open spaces, partnering with the ditch companies, finding funding to do like a shared cross jurisdiction kind of treatment, but it's gonna be challenging, and that's what we're gonna have around it.
yeah, sorry, Larry, your hand's been up for a while. It must be getting tired.
Thank you. No, my hand was doing fine. I just want to ask if the city's going to ease up on the restrictions on gates adjacent to open space. Because just prior to the fire, a lot of fences were replaced and the city was really cracking down and disallowing gates. And I'm a geezer. It's gonna be tough for me to tote a lawnmower over a fence to mow 10-foot swath. So is the city gonna allow periodic openings in the fence line adjacent to open space?
I can respond to that. The city currently does allow that, but what is being asked is to minimize impact as much as possible. So similar to State Forest Service, national parks, it's more about trying to disperse your use so you don't create a social trail or a formal trail out of your gate. So to try and be mindful of minimizing impact and reducing permanent damage to vegetation, but going through your private gate on your private property is technically allowed.
Did you hear that, Larry?
I did hear that, but I know a lot of people got their chops busted when they replaced their fence and tried to put a gate in.
Yeah, I can see that. All I can say is there, yes, that was discussed at the time, and the outcome of that was to really spread education about minimizing the impact and allowing use. So gates were built on those private properties.
So yeah, so related to that is this idea of social trails. So actually doing this project, my sister just moved into an area in Westminster by open space. And I'm like, we're tearing out all your mulch, replacing your fence, we're mowing behind your fence line. And she's like, I don't want people walking along my fence line and looking in my backyard. And I was like, too bad. That's a trade-off like that. Like, I can see that being uncomfortable, but if mowing along a fence line could prevent fire from getting to your fence line and then like traveling between neighbors' property, like that's one that might have to. There's probably some fire resilient plant species that you could put not touching your fence in your backyard that could create a little bit of privacy, or one of those screens that you can pull down on, you know, there's other ways to get around that. We have heard people say that, but I think I'm not letting my sister use that as an excuse. Irrigation is another one that we've heard people mention. It would increase fuel moisture. When you're trying to restore shortgrass prairie, the first couple of years after you've reseeded, those plants are usually very drought tolerant, but you need some moisture to get them started. Like historically, you'd usually get like pulses of regeneration of native plants those years when you had a lot of moisture. So if you're trying to like force that to happen, you usually need to irrigate a little bit. So if there is some shortgrass prairie plant restoration going on, irrigation using well water, existing irrigation lines might be necessary. Irrigation near structures can also be beneficial. The con, though, is if you're irrigating, you're increasing grass production. So then you have taller grass. So then you also need to mow it. So there's a lot of research showing that the really bad fires, like not all of them, but a lot of our really bad fire years are years where we have really wet springs, we get a lot of grass production, and then later in the summer and the fall, it gets really dry. And then you have lots of fuel ready to burn. So that's like one of the big cons with the concept of irrigating. Besides all like the water rights issues, challenges with like putting sprinkler systems across like Davidson Mesa, you'll end up creating more biomass that then you have to mow and collect all the clippings. So it's not really a broad, like a widespread solution to wildfire resilience. I think, let me see, I just have two more. Low flammability landscaping. This is more relevant to parks around city facilities. The recreation center, gorgeous. I took so many pictures of it to use in some of our other presentations about what like low flammability landscaping hardened structure looks like. It's fantastic. So there's cobble and plants that don't dry out, right? There's no juniper right next to the structure. There's some tall grasses, but they're surrounded by cobble. They don't touch each other. Low flammability landscaping in some of these fuel corridors. There's a lot of like, it's not owned by the city, but like green belts that weave between people's communities. If there could be some movement away from having them all be lawns and more towards xeriscape, that could help reduce fire spread and the exposure of structures to fuel that is potential fuel for the fire. There's some more like boutique, small scale things that the city can do around low flammability landscaping, but with what I saw from some of the Marshall Fire things where fire was like creeping up into the trees in the arboretum, like some of these little approaches might actually be useful. Like there's a lot of mulch under some of the trees where you can still see like where the fire burned through the mulch. Probably getting rid of the mulch under more flammable conifers would be a good step, and either just having bare soil or having rock, because I know sometimes the mulch helps reduce evaporation. But removing the mulch, limbing some of the trees, getting rid of trees like junipers are great for wildlife habitat, but they're not great for a fire resilient community. There's other plants, and the Colorado State Forest Service and CSU Extension just released a great publication on low flammability landscaping. They have a lot of different species. They rated them in terms of like their resistance to flames. And a lot of them are native species that are good for pollinators. They have low water use. And there's alternatives to junipers that still have like berries and structure for birds. So I think that's, we're talking like for open space is like, we're not going to do low flammability landscaping. The shortgrass prairie restoration is kind of the version of low flammability landscaping at the big scale in parks, around city facilities, and then private landowners. This is homeowners. This is like one direction to go to still have beautiful vegetation across the community, but vegetation that isn't going to produce embers or carry fire in the same way. And then the very last thing is structure hardening. So some of the city facilities are already very hardened structures because they're newer building, and a lot of newer building code requires that you use more flame resistant building material. There was a great presentation that was given as part of this series for the city of Louisville where people talked about home hardening approaches. So if you didn't see that, I'd recommend that you listen to it. It talks about like the importance of reducing the ability of embers to penetrate your building. So that's where, like we said, fuel treatments can't stop embers from places you're not treating blowing into your area. So that's where like the structure hardening is the best bet to address some of the ember issues, or low flammability landscaping so that you don't have receptive fuels that can catch the embers right next to your structure. So there are some structures that we saw on parks and open space that are like old wood gazebos that need to be retreated, or one shed that's really not in great condition. So small things that can be done on the city side. And then also, I think on the private homeowner side, there's a lot of work that can be done around here. And then there's co-benefits to structure hardening, which is nice because it can be expensive up front, but a lot of non-wood building material doesn't require the maintenance that wood like decking or fencing does. And I don't know about the ordinance here. Do HOAs allow non-wooden fences in the city of Louisville, or is that still an issue? Some.
The city passed an ordinance that basically says if a zoning document requires a wood fence to connect your house, you're exempt from that.
Okay.
And then some neighborhoods after the fire regulations. People are fighting it now. The HOA
Okay.
is based on.
Yeah, some of the HOAs in Louisville, I mean, I don't live in one, but I've talked to people that do, and it's a heated discussion.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. I
Yeah.
won't mention the name of they. But,
Yeah.
some
And that's
people
that's unfortunate. I mean, there's the trade-off of like the aesthetic look of a wood fence some
Right.
people like, so I can, it's not like people just being like completely stubborn, but I think there's a lot of research that it's probably not the way to go with fencing. So, okay, so one of the things that maybe the city of Louisville in conjunction with the planning department, so this wouldn't just be an open space thing, is to create an incentive program for private homeowners who abut open space to help them with replacing their fences and with vegetation removal. So maybe like a cost share kind of program. fire prevention campaign. So we went through a riparian corridor area, and there's some woody debris that could be removed, some debris that you can tell is from like annual flooding that probably could be pulled out, but riparian areas are where I heard the most birds. Like riparian areas habitat. So you don't want to go like completely cutting down all the trees and riparian corridors. So one thing I was thinking about is there's a lot of cottonwood, and I know from my friends who are firefighters in the city of Fort Collins, every year there's fires that start from people's barbecue grill and then cotton fluff that's accumulated in their backyard. So it might be like good for some targeted fire prevention campaigns in areas where you have a lot of cotton fluff or areas that are adjacent to open space. So some of Smokey Bear's message is still really relevant and important to get out there. We don't want people accidentally starting cotton fluff fires. The city is committed through the CWPP process, through other ongoing efforts of like the Boulder County open space to do bigger scale treatments. So this is a map from Boulder County open space where they looked at all their properties. It's too small to see what the different colors are, but it's available online. And the areas that are dark brown are the ones that they identified as being very high hazard. And then the mustard color are very high hazard. So they're going to start focusing more work in those areas. And the part of the Louisville in the southwest area that Bill showed had really high fire risk is surrounded by non-Louisville properties. So working with adjacent property owners is really important. And I'm on a grasslands management committee as part of the Boulder Fireshed Collaborative. And that's people, Louisville's there, Superior, Boulder County Open Space, CU Boulder, Magla's there. A bunch of people are part of that group to learn more about how to mitigate fire risk in the grassland urban interface. So there is partnership and coordination that is going on and will continue and is crucial to address this issue that is like shared risk and shared responsibility across the entire Front Range. There's also at the county scale, some adoption of wildfire rapid detection technology to help see when there is a fire start, so you can address it really quickly, because in grasslands, if you can get there before it's too big, it's a lot easier to suppress. So that's something we'll see how the city of Louisville can tie into that. I don't know if there's really a good place for the city of Louisville to have their own detection camera, but making sure that they're working with the county so that the cameras they do have are covering all of the open space. Yeah.
But the county ones will be up in the, on west of 36 basically.
No, last night he said
They're
there's
working on
like
some other ones. Well,
Oh, they are.
yeah, so they ordered 8 more and they're coming and they're gonna, I don't remember all the locations, but.
Yeah, I
last night,
couldn't write it
the
down
guy
fast
with the
enough.
long guy with the long beard
Yeah.
told us that there's,
not too bad in the county.
yeah, he knows
Yeah.
where they're all going. But there's some out here, there's like one in Longmont and one. I don't know, someplace I don't know where he's talking about that's points east and west or something, anyway. There's one on Arapahoe somewhere, Arapahoe Road. Oh, Arapahoe Ridge, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That was one of them. Okay, so that was everything that we wanted to cover. So a lot of those pros and cons are things from research, from my team's experience with prescribed burning and fire suppression. And also a lot of those bullet points are from things people said in public meetings that I'm rapidly taking notes this whole time. So we had some like small group activities, but there's not really enough of, we are a small group. So if anybody has anything else that they'd like to share, mitigation options that we didn't cover, any feelings like, you know, this option gives me serious heartburn for XYZ reasons, like we want to hear that right now and are really open and interested.
Suggestion for Larry, if there's any other public, maybe just promote them to a list.
Oh, yeah.
Full access, I don't know how many.
So if you're going to be there in 10 minutes, I can be from the rec center to the municipal building in 10 minutes to chat.
Sure. Come on over. We'll be here.
Okay, so I'm leaving the meeting.
Okay, bye, Larry. Melanie or Steve, do you have, I will allow you both, I will unmute you or allow you to talk. So you can unmute yourself if you have a question you would like to ask or a comment.
Thank you.
Or a compliment. I'm just kidding.
I will start with compliment. I think this was a wonderful presentation, got a lot of good information, and I'm really looking forward to what your final report looks like.
Oh, thank you.
I will say that I would like everyone to be aware that the Marshall fire in particular was an anomaly. There was so many things that were extreme and unusual about it. You know, fire break wouldn't have helped a whole lot with the crossing 36,
Yeah.
so. You know, and we had homes in my neighborhood that were stucco homes with tile roofs that still just, well, that's what they're collapsed. Yeah, exactly, so.
Mhm.
This was just so extreme that none of these things was a perfect storm, could have been exact.
Right.
Yeah.
And just real quickly, to segue off that, that is, nothing is 100%. Whatever we do in the mountains and down here, and we really want to try to get, homeowners, landowners to be thinking about the concept of living with wildfire and taking ownership of helping that mitigation. So it's really kind of
That's what the state campaign is all about.
Yeah.
I have a more Louisville focused question, all two parts. First of all, thank you for this, and I, just to back up on your slides about where you said, yeah, there it is, fire prevention campaign. I think that's really important, and there's been a group of us who are residents, all of whom were impacted by the fire, including myself and Larry, who's on his way over here, who have been meeting with the city, Ember was at one of the meetings for several months, about these exact issues. So I think this is really great, but I do think that a campaign of some kind is extremely important. And coming from the city, not coming from us as fire survivors, because and I'm just gonna say this, the reality is the other 3/4 of the city who is not impacted by this fire, they care, but they don't care on the same level.
Right.
And they don't have as much of a stake or an interest in doing this type of stuff, even though now you can get $5,000 from the state potentially to retrofit your house. To take this on. And those of us on the western end of the city who are affected are particularly concerned about this because it's very likely that we are the fire break for the rest of the city. And we want our neighbors, like, for example, up on the neighborhood surrounding Annette Brand would be a perfect example. I have a lot of friends that live up there. Nothing against them, but they, you know, they were not necessarily affected by the fire, but that doesn't mean the next fire isn't gonna come on the northwest side of the city. And those of us on the west side of the city are essentially the fire break for the rest of the city.
I
So
hadn't
we
heard it put
really
that
would
way.
like
Yeah.
the rest of the city to pay attention and to do stuff so that it's a citywide effort and not just those of us on the west side of the city that, and the south side that were affected, who are sort of, you know, spearheading this from a citizen perspective.
Yeah, what's the
That's what I
community
was gonna
group
say.
that you're representing or you
Uh,
work with?
Well, it's called the Louisville Neighborhood Preparedness Roundtable. Oh, no, but I did not name it, I just didn't say that.
But that's exactly what we're all looking for, and I hate to use this phrase, but the spark plugs in the communities. That's what we need and the municipalities need, and we are talking about a unified effort of fire prevention campaign. That's kind of segues off of what the CSFS is doing across the state.
Right.
But the county has just introduced or hired an outreach and education coordinator.
Right.
And her charge is to coordinate municipalities to begin this. It takes time. It just takes time, and I know people want this stuff right away, and I feel like we have shifted the needle a little bit. And we're starting to see things happen, but it takes people time and research. This wonderful presentation that Megan didn't she had to get out on the ground?
Oh, I know, it's great, no, I think it's great.
Just so you know, we are all talking about it. We're not just talking, we're planning. So it's great stuff and we want to tap into.
Yeah, it's good to know that is something that as like a survivor of it, that you're interested in like a fire prevention.
Yeah, so I think this
Campaign.
is great, and I think that, there is other incentive money coming down the pipeline through the state also. I won't get into that right now, that we as fire survivors basically got DOLA to agree to encourage people to do the home hardening side of it. It's not gonna be income qualified or anything, and so, like any other incentives, I mean, not if the city has the opportunity or use 1A or I don't know, some random funds for some of this stuff you listed. In conjunction with what the city's doing, I think, it has to be community-wide effort.
So just real quick, because 1A is.
I know it's county money.
No, but it's, we are building that program. And one of the things that we are including in that is capacity building for municipalities for outreach and education, for planning and all that good stuff. So that is the works. And then just one other thing, and I know Jim didn't talk on this, and I don't want to misspeak. The Wildfire Partners is going to come to the Eastern Plains with an incentive program.
Right.
Yeah, so chunk of money, not huge, but money to motivate folks for home hardening.
I think that's correct. And I understand what you're saying about the timing.
Yeah.
And that it takes time, but on the other hand, I mean, at least it's still in here, but there's other people, there's probably gonna be 100 or more people who have moved back in their houses by September 15th of this year. And right now, those people are deciding, am I gonna do a deck that's class A, or am I gonna do a glass? So even though.
Yeah, there's an important
this-
opportunity now.
Yeah, there's almost a missed opportunity,
Yeah.
because there will be several hundred people moving back in between September and the end of the year.
And we wish these folks were coming to these meetings to hear about the home hardening, and we know that the incentive and the financial part isn't there, but that outreach and education getting them, so we're not rebuilding the same. Right, and we do the same messaging for folks in the mountains.
Right.
Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, it could be a little too early, but is there any opinions on how effective the cap raising process was? It was a couple weeks ago. Could be a little early, but it doesn't look like they chopped down on a lot of stuff.
I would say, so we have studies that are going to be coming forward that, but just with ocular observations, it seems like it's about a 50% fuels reduction.
Wow.
In the areas where we can go. So you'll see it in some cases, it's not, if you've been out to see the goats are mowing everything down to around the cob. The cattle were more patchy and selective of what they eat, so it's a little, more similar to bison, where it's a little patchy. Some areas are low, some areas are really low. That's a little bit of a mosaic, but overall, we're estimating about 50%. And they're returning. So we need to put that back. When fuels are drying.
Sorry.
It was like exactly 10 minutes. Yeah, back.
Two things. One, you said that there wasn't a lot of research on, like how short to put the grass or how grass is required. Is that something that companies develop? It's, in that, I mean, that's like actually testing stuff.
Yeah, CU Boulder, City of Boulder, and Boulder County Open Space do micro grants, and there's a lot
Yeah,
being
and
done.
then the Boulder Watershed, the grassland working for, again, there is some research going into it. We're trying to come up with exactly what they just presented, pros and cons, right? But we know we have to do a lot more on the research. There is not a lot out there. So, but yes.
So there is a lot of research on grasslands and fire in grasslands, but not the grassland urban interface. So research on mowing impacts on like native species and amount of grass, yes, but not like how much grazing do you need to reduce radiant heat that would damage a home. So like that last like connection between grassland ecology research and fire mitigation, fire resilience is like the bridge that's missing. And fortunately, there's now money and interest in that.
Okay, second thing, a lot more trees are dying. And so, and I don't mean like that one tree burning dark, but like huge swaths of trees that, you know, just have dried out and died. And it's like way more than you get like a tree company to take a tree. So what do we do about like all of the standing dead trees, pine beetles, or themselves being like additional fire risks?
So are you talking about like cottonwood here in the eastern portion or what region?
Like formerly wooded slopes that are in open space areas that have just dried out and died.
With pine trees?
Yeah, different types of like trees. I mean, some cottonwood,
Yeah.
where the main ones died and then it's like, it's not even great. So like, what do you think?
Yeah.
Kind of different, what do you do? And then that causes erosion and landslides if it's on a slope.
Right, and dead trees are really important wildlife habitat, like for cavity nesting birds, it's a tree, so. Once a pine tree, if it's killed by the mountain pine beetle, once all the needles fall off, and the bark starts falling off and the little branches start falling off, it's like a telephone pole. It's very hard for it to ignite. Once it falls on the ground, then it can carry, like it can hold a lot of heat, like putting a giant log on your campfire. But a lot of standing dead trees actually aren't a giant fire risk. It's like the material that they're like sloughing off and dropping below them are a bigger issue, but like the dead tree itself isn't. But you can still get fire in those dead trees, but there's a trade-off with them being wildlife habitat, and it's probably not. If I had money on my property, I would cut a juniper instead of like a dead tree that had no leaves, small branches on it.
We call those 1,000-hour fuels. Grasses are 1 hour fuel, and your flashing fuel. They burn quick. 1,000-hour fuels are those bigger logs or trees that can hold fire and heat longer. So that's just some fire ecology to understand.
And it would be interesting if, like how the city or ditch companies would feel about people like removing some of that material, like could you adopt a ditch and like drag the stuff out of there? I know that's.
We have done that in certain locations, North Open Space is one where there is a lot of that material. That's something we're having volunteer activities on this year, but back to the balance, some down material is also really great for habitat.
Right.
So it's that question of value system between habitat and removal. So our initial project this year would be pretty small scale, just to start removing some obvious stuff, starting near home perimeters and leaving the interior stuff where we want to keep the wildlife values high, and being cognizant of kind of that moving interface. So that's all part of this time.
I think Amber raises the point, it's people tend to talk about all or nothing. I don't think anyone wants all of open space, no, and I don't think they want everything out of every ditch everywhere. But if you look at the risk and proximity to neighborhoods, I think that's where it used to be.
You're right, and this is why these hazardous assessments, either being done here or in the CW, these are gonna help us inform and prioritize those areas adjacent to the community.
Is Louisville doing its own separate CW? I know you mentioned Boulder, I think is doing its own separate CWPP. Is that common? I mean, like, or do they just go underneath here? So like, is Louisville doing its own, or are they just going under the county?
Will fall under us.
Okay.
However, if down the road Louisville wants to get more granular and more localized, the county is broad, right?
Right.
It's not gonna get down into every neighborhood. It may be down the road that there's some CWP funding that they're like, hey, we've done this assessment, now
We're gonna see what the county looks like
Got it.
first,
Okay.
and then decide at that point.
Yeah.
If a lot of information from both assessments that the consultants did,
is it
and the city's doing a little bit, and then on top of the county, we decide at that point, is it worth spending a lot of money to do our own.
That makes sense.
It's already.
Superior is very similar to Louisville, so whatever Mountain View is doing and Superior is doing a little bit, we could probably take that off. So.
Anything else, or you drove all the way over here? Let's hear it all.
Well, I mean, that's
It's not that.
That's all I wanted to say is I heard people talk all or nothing, and I don't think that's not realistic, and I don't think that's what people want.
Yeah.
For me, for example, a 10-foot fire, fuel reduction, to keep it out of the neighborhood, we've gone a long way. Like when you look at the state risk map, it showed the golf course in green is not an issue. I would argue that the rough around the first and second hole took out the whole green neighborhood. And I think I can make a pretty good argument about that. So that's the type of thing we need to look at. We need to look at truly the interface where those grasslands are adjacent to the subdivisions and what we can do to give the firefighters a reasonable chance to make a stop.
You're hired, yes, that's what that.
Yeah.
We are gonna be looking.
Yeah, and I think the Marshall Fire is a great opportunity to learn. I mean, it's unfortunate that the learned lessons come at a great cost to a lot of people, but I think most people would see the golf course and think that is not a fire hazard. Like it's a safety zone. Like you wouldn't think about it, but now we know. And now-
I can tell you the rough was at least 10 foot wide, and it was at least shoulder, hip to shoulder deep in grass.
And probably tennis and probably golf balls too.
Very few of the grasses around here. are even
Yeah.
grass.
So please come to the community engagement CWP meeting, because those are the things we want, what you just said, incorporated into.
And if the city needs a volunteer for someone from Louisville, I'll put my hand up.
Former firefighter.
Yeah, I was gonna say former fire, he's a former fire.
Right up.
I have a question. I was at a water meeting in Superior a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about fire in the mountains, in the woods. And they said that it gets hot enough that it damages the soil, and soil then won't absorb the water when we do get rain, and that's why you get mudslides and all of that. Did the soil, like in Davidson Mesa, get that hot that?
Hydrophobics. It usually, so you have to have a long, high heat, long residence time for hydrophobic soil.
Grants, steady
Mhm.
trees.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So why do you-
yeah, if you look at most of the ones here now, even last year, it was some green. It was sterilized, that's what happens,
Okay.
when it's sterilized, it creates a no life. There might be no grass growing, like my open field next to my our house is lush right now, so.
Which is next to my neighborhood.
So grass is designed.
Could be mowing that.
No, I mean, it's healthy for it, but given our air pollution concerns here, I prescribe fire opportunities.
Yeah.
are-
Very limited.
Short window, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, hydrophobic soil, yeah. Not a concern in the Marshall Fire perimeter.
What about the soil that around the houses?
That is very, there's probably a lot of concerns in the soil around the homes. That's a very,
More volatile, different chemicals.
Bring it to be there. Well, I mean, like, yeah, like parts of my irrigation system are sticking out of my yard, like.
Right. Yeah, you know, like.
Right, we have reached the end of our time, we'll probably talk about this. forever.
Yeah.
But again, just as a reiteration, this was great input, I think, for our consultants. I want to thank them for taking the time to be here with us tonight. Thank you. Small and mighty project, great input for the quantity of people we had. So their final report is tentatively scheduled on the council agenda for a much more condensed version of this presentation. Tentatively, the last meeting of July. If there isn't kind of a holdup with some of the new modeling stuff that'll come from the state, we've given a little bit of wiggle room to come here to feed that into August. So Therefore, Tim, and look forward to the presentation, everyone else can look forward to attending and providing input if you like. Or if you have questions in advance, with the agenda post, we're happy to filter those to council as well. So thank you guys again for your time tonight and being a part of this process. Make sure you find it in and take a brief end.
You know, really,